Welcome everyone to the December Research Committee meeting. I guess we can go ahead and get on with business. First item we can do is Tanya's presentation on Black resources in Raleigh. Tanya,
Yep.
if you want to go ahead and do that.
I will. Let's see. Click the share button. And here we go. Oh, well, there we go. Back to the beginning. So I am just, fairly briefly going to let you know what RHDC has already done over the years, including reports, designations, and then discuss some potential ideas for future work on Raleigh's Black history. There have been a variety of initiatives over the year, including the research and then ultimate publication of Culture Town. There have been some landmark designations that were done in areas that were not determined to be National Register eligible, including in Oberlin Village and College Park and Idlewild. Excuse me. And then let you know the National Register historic districts and historic overlay districts that we have. In between 1987 and 1992, there was a survey, an architectural survey done in Raleigh, and one of the phase one of that was a survey of AfricanAmerican communities. At that time, they were looking at the core of Raleigh out to the 1988 city limit boundaries. And as part of that, there were 56 oral histories. They documented through those oral histories some areas: College Park, East Raleigh, South Park, Fourth Ward, Idlewild, Method, Nazareth, Oberlin, and Smoky Hollow. From that study was the development of the East Raleigh South Park National Register Historic District, and then the ultimate publication of Culture Town, Life in Raleigh's African American Communities, which described the project and shared its findings. It included a lot of photos and came with a 22-minute cassette tape. It is now sold out. It was actually forced. I don't know how many copies were actually published, but it was, I think, 2016, maybe 2015, when the last copy was finally sold. So it is now officially out of print. We've got a handful of copies in the planning office that folks can borrow, and there might be some bootleg copies out there for lots of money. The plates from the publication were donated to state archives, and somehow the oral histories ended up at the City Museum, and Ernie Dollar there, they have digitized them and I think transcribed them. I spoke with him. Well, that's a future thing. So that is that. There's a picture of it in case you aren't familiar with it. It is, really the only published resource that I know of that looks at the physical environment. And I meant to look and see what the time period was for the book, not when it was published, but the historical time period, and I did that. So now I'm going to just sort of go through the various landmark designations. I divided. There are about 30 of the 170 some individually designated Raleigh historic landmarks. Approximately about 37 of them are related to, have their significance primarily or in part with, Black history in Raleigh. They're on each screen. Sorry for doing a list, but I did a list. I've organized them by the area of the city, and then they're sorted by designation date, with the earliest being at the top and the most recent being at the bottom. So in Overland Village, we've got 7 designations. The Latta House and University site, the house itself had been designated much earlier. It, burnt and the remains removed in 2006. It was redesignated as an archaeological site in 2010. And so this was one of the areas which is now an historic overlay district, but the neighborhood itself was determined not to be eligible for the National Register. And so the commission's method of preserving history was to move forward with and seek permission from owners to designate individual landmarks. There may be some that are also listed in the National Register in addition to being designated as historic landmarks. Method, there we've got a handful of designations. There was an early one, the agricultural building of the Barry O'Kelly School, and then most recently the Barry O'Kelly School campus as a whole was designated as a landmark, and then individually the Lily Rogers Stroud House. There is, the Lily Stroud Rogers House. There is a context study that was created to help us find the Lily Stroud Rogers House, and that is available, I think, on the commission's website. So it tells the story of method, and I believe there might be one other house that was identified. It also talks about the Rosenwald School that is no longer extant on the school campus. Target Street, also known as Black Main Street, we've got 3 landmarks there: the Delaney Building, which is near the corner of Blunt Street, Raleigh Furniture Building, and then the Grand United Order of Oddfellows Building. Those are landmarks. And then we've got a lot that are just, I lumped generically into East Raleigh. They're not necessarily that whole area, they're not designated as neighborhoods per se. So the earliest being the Roger Bagley Daniels Pegues house, which is also the other property that has statewide significance in Raleigh, and one of the 11 in the state. Prince Hall, or which is, I guess, officially the Masonic Temple building. Washington Graded and High School. They've actually done a lot of research recently. The school itself, for their anniversary, they did I know there's a news article out there, but they had a whole celebration a few years back. Tupper Memorial Baptist Church, the carousel at Chavis, I'm remembering things that aren't on my National Register list. But the park as a whole, the John Chavis Memorial Historical Park, was recently listed in the National Register as part of the park master planning process, and that happened maybe 3 years ago. The Dr. M.T. Pope House, which is now owned by the city. Chavis Park is also owned by the city. The Atwater Perry House, Gethsemane Seventh-day Adventist Church, Mount Hope Cemetery, and then the William A. Curtis House, also known as Villa Florenza. The William A. Curtis House is listed in the National Register, and it was done a few years prior to its landmark designation. That is a property that was on the city's vacant and closed list, but was a right buyer came about and took it off that list, and did a rehabilitation and put it back into service. Although it may not be back in service yet. If not, it's really, really close. The lovely man is doing things all by himself. Now I just realized at the top of the list is the David and Ernestine Weaver house, which I'm going to leave on our landmark list until the day they took things away, in the College Park, Ottawa. This is another section where neither neighborhood, even at in the late 80s, was found to have sufficient integrity to be listed in the National Register. So again, they took a individually designated landmark path. So the Weaver House, St. Monica School, which is on the Tarboro Road, community center campus. So the whole park is not a landmark, but the building itself and a little bit of land around it. Also a city property. And then the Delaney house that hopefully is going to get rehabbed soon since the houses got constructed on either side of it. Both Shaw and St. Augustine's have individual designations, one of the earliest being SD Hall. And then, I see, I sorted them by Shaw is at the top and then St. Aug's. So the chapel at St. Augustine's and SD Hall were two of the early designations in the first round when it was the Raleigh Historic Sites Committee. St. Agnes Hospital, which is still a landmark, even though it's a shell. The shell is the result of I don't know. That was part of a rehab that went awry. And then the two Leonard Medical buildings were recently designated. And then there are a handful of others that didn't fit into that specifically. You've got a couple churches, the First Baptist Church at Wilmington Street and Morgan Street, right there at the state capitol, St. Paul AME Church, Murphy School, and then St. Matthew's School is a Rosenwald school, which was only recently-ish annexed into the city. And so we found out about it, and the church that owns it was happy to have it designated. And then we've got some the districts that are listed in the National Register. St. Augustine's campus is more square. I say partially because, that section of Hargett Street known as Black Main Street is in there. Of course, East Raleigh South Park, Madonna Acres, Battery Heights, and Rochester Heights, all three of those were designated at the same time. That came about after a follow-up on looking at historic neighborhoods and from 1945 to 1965. So these are African-American related, but later developed neighborhoods. And East Raleigh South Park is challenging now because there have been many demolitions over the years. And then we've got two historic overlay districts, three if you count Moore Square and Hargett Street, 2012, Prince Hall, which includes a little bit of East Raleigh South Park National Register District, and then of course Inland Village. And then at raleighhistoric.org, which is the website and mobile app, there are a few tours. That's the way the site's organized out there. So the Blunt Street Historic Corridor tour, and which is geared towards and I don't know if they're still there. I haven't looked lately, but there were banners, historic related, art banners out there that was funded from money from a cell tower that went up really close to the Prince Hall Sonic Temple without going through the Section 106 process. So we got some blood money. And anyway, so there's a tour, and the southern part of that is related to the African American history. There is one specifically on African American landmarks. That dot way up in the far right there is St. Matthew's School. And then Overland Village and Historic Method have their tours as well. And I guess this is when I'm going to close it now. Ideas for future work. I think that's when I went and took a nap. I wasn't doing well yesterday. Where are y'all? There you are. I have to stop sharing. So the couple of ideas I have spoken. I want to make that bigger. Sorry, I'm having technical issues today. I have the little bitty. No. There it is.
You're muted again. It's
Okay.
better. Yeah.
All right.
I have a couple of questions when you're ready to.
Okay, let me just mention these things that I didn't write down before I forget. The Ernie Dollar at the museum has had a thought about potentially trying to republish Culture Town with a preface, sort of updating, updating it. So that is certainly a possibility. There's another possibility could be to looking at later history of, in Raleigh, such as, more of the, later Jim Crow era, and then perhaps some of the civil rights history and then in the research done for part of the Hillcrest Cemetery report, the architectural historians that were working on that learned a lot more about the Leitner family that is not in that report. And apparently they had part of their family was involved in doing some building. And so there's an idea of maybe looking at, architects, designers, craftsmen in the African-American community, because we do have historic context on modernist architects. We've got it on those that were affiliated with the NC State School of Design, but nothing geared specifically to African Americans. Now I'm done. Ask away.
Thanks. I pretty consistently keep hearing about the development going on for the soccer stadium, which is in what everyone says Southeast Raleigh. And I'm wondering if your East Raleigh South Park area is an overlap to that soccer stadium area. So there was no historic work done on that soccer stadium area, or was there?
So in all likelihood, what happened is, so there may be some study, and with either local or National Register designations, the district boundaries are drawn based on concentrations of, intact properties. And the area where that's being built was, which I think is more in the Fourth Ward area, there was already fairly denuded and not a concentration of remaining historic buildings. And so, and this is where too, depending on the direction you want to go, we may really want to partner with the Historic Museums and Advisory Board and then program. With the Historic Development Commission, you're looking at the history of Raleigh, but it is pretty tightly focused on preserving extant buildings and telling a broader picture as it relates to extant buildings. But when you get to an area where there's already nothing there, then we sort of pass the ball to telling the history to the city museum. So it's, I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Sort of. So my question, because I know that the city council's, I think, dealing with it next week or the week after and approving the whole construction. And I haven't heard anything about if there will be limits or consideration for preserving that area. I mean, I moved here just slightly after the Oberlin Village and Thomas Sayre's Oberlin Rising, and I was invited to that opening. And it was so interesting to me to discover the history of that area and to understand that that was such an amazing community that was in Raleigh, and I had no idea. And I'm wondering if there had been any work done about this area of Southeast Raleigh, because I know it's historically an African-American area. And should we do it? And should we want to partner? I mean, I don't know the rules to get it done, but I would hate to look back on it and say, oops, wow, we should be nice folk now and do it. I would like to think we could be ahead of the ball with that a little, and I don't know if we have or haven't, but I'm kind of proposing that to our research committee. several people have come to me about it, and I don't have the history to know, so I'm bringing it up now.
So the timing of I'm trying to remember, there is I think a proposal, and please don't quote me on this exactly, but
I'm quoting.
they're not nearly to a construction stage. I believe where they are is looking at the creation of developing a public-private partnership. And right now that is at Planning Commission. If it is reported out from Planning Commission on December 8th, then there will be a special city council meeting on December 15th for a public hearing on that. That was just set at yesterday's city council. And that would be, from 7 to 9 on December 15th. I'd have to look again to see exactly what they're looking at there. I'm trying to remember when we were looking at the boundaries of that, Colette. My recollection is that there's still a story there. There was history there, but I don't think there are any buildings left where the complex is being proposed, except perhaps it's really close to the Raleigh Waterworks and E.B. Bain.
Yep, there is nothing on site that we were concerned about, but its proximity to the waterworks was something that
Right. And then of course, anytime there is development, things, start to build around them. So if it is a direction y'all want to look at, I would need to look at see if I can figure out what the precise boundaries were from the original study. I think I looked at that before, and right now that is an area we don't know a whole lot about, except that things were torn down in this community to make way for other things to happen. And that's certainly something that we're starting to look at generally in the planning department to, as projects come through, that planning department's like involved in creating, is tell that part of the story also.
Well, if I can help you in any way, I mean, I've now had several people, and I'm just new to this group, but several people have come to me and said there's a coalition looking at the whole development and how's it going to impact the community and the African American community. And you brought up, reprinting of Culture Town, and I'm thinking, wow, there's so much amazing history here that we've. And in fact, at some point, I think Heather even said it might be interesting to do some research on that area and see how that would be something she might write about. I mean, so I think there's enough interest in, and I know it's late, I know it's the 11th hour, but if it doesn't happen now, it's probably not going to happen. And I'd like, if I can, help you do something before rather than after. So, I'm just bringing it up because it seems to me that's part of the work of the research committee. So just let me know. I mean, I have a few projects I'm in the middle of, but I'm hearing this, so I'm raising it for us.
Well, and that is always the challenge, deciding what y'all want to focus on, because there's never a lack of good projects.
I'm sure. It's just, we brought up the whole African American community thing, and since I've landed in Raleigh, I mean, I was in Chicago when they built the United Center. So they tore up Skid Row for the United Center, but there wasn't any real plan what to do with all the people who lived there and how to house them and care for them. And so the city, for the last 40 years, I guess I lived there almost 30 of those 40 years, was struggling with the fact that they've displaced so many people and there's so much homelessness as a result of it. And they deal with that every day. And I'd like us to potentially think about what the history is and how, if we displace that history and those people, what happens. And I'm not saying we can solve it, because clearly I'm way behind the 8 ball here, but I think we can at least help the discussion happen around it, and learn from other situations. And it seems to me that if we build a stadium there, we should at least understand what we're doing and what we're displacing and what we're losing. And, I don't know if we can do it this quickly, but I'll do whatever I can to help. Raise my hand, here I am. And if the committee wants to do it, that's up to the committee, but I'm just bringing it up.
I wanted to add quickly, I wasn't super familiar either, only starting with the city in January, about the specific boundaries of the proposed project. So I just went and took a look at the website and tried to do a quick comparison of what it looks like we have extant in that area versus where the project boundaries are. And there are a couple of very small, what look like historic houses. They are just south of the water plant, the waterworks, that it looks like even the project boundaries might tooth around those, and they're not a part of the development. I'm not positive on that, so don't quote me. But other than that, I don't see any other historic resources. It looks like it's all already happened. I mean, clearly there's not that much empty land for no reason in 2020. So something happened, but it looks like it would be, as Tanya suggested, a history of what happened to the neighborhood rather than efforts to preserve the existing neighborhood.
Hey, Tanya, can y'all hear me?
Yep.
I'd be interested in figuring out what that big soccer stadium project, what may be required from a permit standpoint, in terms of often large developments will kick in historical research, archaeological stuff, etc., if they require certain permits. So I don't know, depending on permits and funding, other entities might get involved and do research reports, architectural surveys, blah blah blah. So that may very well be part of the development in the future. I don't know, but Tanya might be able to answer that.
That's a good question. What he's alluding to is there are, when there are not just federal funds, but federal permitting, the only thing I can think of that there is a requirement that historic resources are taken into account, and that includes, archaeological. The only thing I can think of is potentially something from the Army Corps of Engineers because of the water, works and the water stuff happening there. So
that is normally the main driver of those, is if they're impacting any streams or rivers or creeks. Often they have to get permits from the Corps, and that kicks in requirements for historical stuff. So Susan, to your concerns and others, it may very well be that other entities take care of that, or at least look into it, other than us.
The waterworks aren't threatened, are they?
not directly, no. I think it's worth keeping an eye on, though.
Would you all ever, sorry, would you all ever, or do you kind of talk to the architects at all or try to reach out to them during this process? I know Gensler, it looks like, did the study. And I know some people at their local office that, I mean, usually our community is pretty open as they can be about, you know, kind of the research and development of the project. And it could be interesting to even just have a quick conversation with them if they're willing, just about what they've gone through development process. I know I know some people over there, and usually there is some, when we work on projects, there is some research and depth that goes into what happened on the site historically and things like that. So that could also be a good way to get information pretty quickly about what's going on there.
The commission has in the past. I don't, we've not had a project like this come forward. Certainly, where I've mostly seen y'all reaching out are on projects that have come through either for rezoning cases and in trying to convince them to incorporate a building into a potential project as opposed to tearing it down. But that is not unheard of and not a bad idea.
Okay, what I'll do is I work with a couple people over there on don't work there, but I work with them through some other extra efforts. So I can just shoot them a quick text message and see if it's something that they could talk to us about potentially, and then go from there and sort of get you all connected.
Thank you.
But I do appreciate what Susan is saying about even if there's not something there left to preserve, just kind of unearthing the story. I did a lot of research into like urban renewal in Charlotte. And again, I think one of the wonderful things about Raleigh that kind of Charlotte did that Raleigh did not do is, get rid of a lot of their historic structures to make way for, a totally new sort of urban environment. So anyway, but I think if there's a story to be told here that can be captured in some way for the future, I think that would be really valuable. I also had just like a couple of a question and a comment about one of the other things that you mentioned, but I don't want to pull us off topic of this if anybody has more to say about it.
You can go ahead, Prisha.
Okay. So the other question that I had, well, I guess, Tanya, when you mentioned wanting to sort of do some investigation into, African-American architectural designers in the area and families and kind of taking that approach to, the resources behind developing, like who's that team and celebrating from that perspective. That's something that I've actually been thinking about since joining this committee. So I'm excited to hear that could be a potential like future opportunity. And I have one project in mind that it's like, oh, this would be a really cool one to get designated. But before I guess make mention of that, this is probably from my lack of knowledge, but I was wondering what are the benefits, I guess, of landmark designation? So when we're approaching owners or people we know about, hey, let's make this effort, or are you all interested? What's the sell, I guess, for that?
Sure. So landmark designation comes with, benefits and responsibilities. Responsibility being the requirement to get a certificate of appropriateness for any exterior changes. And on the off chance possibility, there are some interior parts that are designated. Those two would need a COA. That's really rare. I think the only building we have that has interior landmark designation is the E.B. Bain water treatment plant. The stairs are part of the landmark designation, but typically speaking, getting a COA on the exterior is the most folks are interested in. The benefit is if you're a property tax paying entity, it is a 50% property tax deferral. So essentially you're taxed at half the value. So with the idea being that the extra money is used to help you with upkeep of the property. So that is the primary benefit, is the 50% property tax deferral.
Okay, that's really good.
Plus the pride, and you get,
yeah,
we laud you.
Okay. No, that sounds great. And I'll throw this out there to you all. I think one of the projects that I had in mind, and maybe it's an interesting conversation about like, it's not necessarily falling in this sort of Jim Crow era of things, but the Gregg Museum of Art and Design on NC State's campus, I think could be a wonderful project to see have landmark designation. The historic chancellor's residence was built back in, and I'm sorry, this is a little bit selfish because I had the fortune of working on that project too. But the historic chancellor's residence was built back in 1928. And then the addition was done very recently. It's a relatively modern addition, but I think what's significant about it is that it was done by Phil Freelon. So it's just kind of this sort of like hybrid of, wonderful things worth capturing and sort of freezing in time and protecting, in my opinion. And I believe, an entity like NC State could be up for that. I'm not sure the details about how that works when it comes to universities and taxes and things. But there are projects like that, I think, that come to mind that could start to fall into, or, kind of bringing the idea that we're sort of what should be recognized in historical, kind of like even moving forward, even if it is something that's a modern edition or, not of something that's a little bit more historic.
Right. So the good news with local landmark designation is there is a less firm date as to how old something needs to be. For National Register listing, the standard is 50 years. And if it was built less than 50 years ago, you have to really make the case that it is, super extra significant. There's an exception. But for local landmark designation, we don't need that. Dorton Arena, when it was designated a landmark, was only 30 years old. But that's, a pretty iconic. And then, of course, if it's something that's going to be associated with a person, there's, I think, an unwritten, rule, at least locally, that the person, is not with us any longer. So, but as far as NC State campus, if we had someone who had a connection there, we have been unsuccessful in getting any more landmarks on the property there. Holiday Hall is a landmark, and that's it. I think the whole campus is National Register listed, but because there are not the property tax benefits and there is the COA requirement, we have been unsuccessful. Like there have been other properties that we have reached out, and I'm not saying that we should stop reaching out because, administrations turn over and, somebody may know the right person. So that is I would think, the biggest hump there. The other piece is taking a sort of, this might be the right time to now again take a broader look at what's potentially out there, do some survey work, and not just looking at more recent time frames of things that have happened since the last time we did the study, rather than relying on people knowing, projects and sort of picking them out that way. So it might be the time to do another survey that identifies other properties for potential designations. You're doing that now, albeit very slowly, a small study on LGBTQ history in Raleigh. That's in the works, but it might be time to look again. And that's part of what I think we're talking about today, is to see what you're interested in as the research committee, and then have something to bring forward to the retreat where the commission will be, making decisions on the path that they want to take forward. Because that is then where staff will, find projects, focus the money, apply for grants if we needed to help do studies. We're waiting to hear what direction the commission wants to go, because like I said, there's not a lack of things to do.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, if we as a research committee can coalesce around a specific topic or a couple of specific topics, we can present those to the commission, and then there can be funding and we can move forward doing that research, and there can be a structured plan versus I got a friend who wants to historically landmark their house, right? I mean,
Correct. And
okay,
that's what I would.
Yeah, I feel like that would be a really wonderful thing, Ian, if we could, as a committee, make that, because not that I object to the way we're doing it, but it feels to me like if it's somebody's house and they have a particular interest, they push it forward. But if it's really for the benefit of the community, I'd love to see who's going to take ownership of that. And I feel like that's kind of our responsibility.
Agreed. And that's what I was trying to illustrate with, the work that had done in the past is, that survey back in the late 80s. And there have been other updates to the architectural survey in Raleigh over the years, but nothing else that is specifically, focused on the African American community. And I do kind of feel like we may have hit sort of, the end of the greater benefits from that study, and it might be time to take the next step. Certainly, one thing is that, there's now a lot more physically that's in the city limits. So there are other areas of Wake County to look at. And then, of course, more recent history, things that have, gotten going.
I think looking into Jim Crow properties would be really interesting and helpful, which sort of bleeds into a little bit the landmarking the FHA houses. As the GI Bill was pretty discriminatory.
I think what we can do as staff, if y'all vote today to sort of push forward on, move forward on that idea, what we can do is find out what research there has been done in the state, if anything, and just to see how big of a project, get an idea of how big of a project it would need to be. So anyway, now I'm just blathering.
Anybody else have any opinions on that?
I think it's a great idea. I know I'm not like formally a research committee member, so that's why I'm gonna.
You are now. You came. You spoke.
But I think that would be a great effort. And then I know you mentioned like some of the strategic partnerships. Well, one, I have like, as far as the architecture that I studied to get my master's degree, it was in African American history. I focused on Charlotte, but I am very interested in that for Raleigh. So I would really enjoy being a part of it. But also as far as like strategic connections and partnerships, as that structure moves forward, I like what Susan is saying, like a more formal structure that somehow gets funded and supported in some way. And then as we develop partnerships with other organizations, I'm also aligned with North Carolina's National Organization Minority Architects chapter. And so serve on the board with that. And there has been conversations about how we, get linked up and recognize like African American architecture historically in North Carolina. So there's a group of us here in the Triangle, there's a group in Charlotte, and we're trying to balance that. So even in that, you know, as we develop it and develop the structure, maybe there's a way that we can also kind of pull even like boots on the ground resources as far as people willing to help with the research and make some more connections and things like that. So I think it's great. And I do like the focus on the sort of Jim Crow era, you know, as a starting point. I think that would be great. And if sort of in the back of my mind, as if there is this sort of other list of more modern-ish things, you know, or other work done by African-American architects in the community that was significant for because they are significant or because it was significant or both, you know, just I'll make some notes about that and see if it's appropriate to bring it forth at some time.
Okay, we do track potential landmarks right now fairly informally in a behind the scenes spreadsheet slash access database. So, you know, that has been written down. It'll be added to the list, even though we may not have the, you know, the research on it yet. And that's the point of the study, is to learn the history, identify historic properties or districts, and then identify future areas of research. So, you know, it's continual. And that is actually one of, as a certified local government through the state federal program, you know, keeping the architectural survey updated is one of your responsibilities.
So can we move on? Are we okay? What do we need to do with the Balland report? I thought we were done with this.
I may have misunderstood from last time. What I would like to do is so I think we've got some typos to work up, but with your go ahead, we will bring it to the business meeting for formal, you know, look, we did this, let's accept it. And we will then put it on the rhdc.org website. And also George Smart will put it on North Carolina Modernist website. And I feel like they've changed the name again and I had it wrong. But anyway, he's been emailing me once a month if it was okay to publish yet. And I keep saying, I need the commission to see it first. So it'll also go up there on the Leaf Vallon page of their website as well. So if you give me the thumbs up.
You have my blessing.
All righty, I will bring it.
Okay. Well, the only other thing I have is the FHA housing, and I wanted to ask you, Tanya, before I get into this whole thing, Tanya and staff, really, what, realistically speaking, what would this look like? I mean, it doesn't seem all that feasible, really, to landmark these houses, but maybe I'm wrong. Putting aside the fact that the housing policies of the day were racist, putting that aside, it seems unlikely that we could landmark these, or we should landmark these, because as I think Colette said this, it may have been you, Aaron, that these houses have, their strength is in numbers and not individually. And the area has already been, well, maybe not Georgetown, but Highmount is on the National Register, I think. So what are your thoughts on this?
It's up to you. It's not an area that has been an area of focus since I've been on the, I'm not on the commission, just I've been working with y'all and working with the city, almost 14 years now. We did you know, Highmount is one of the recent National Register nominations, and potentially, you know, when as staff, I'm not back here pushing for that one. Personally, I think there are other routes, but we will focus on whatever you want. I mean, ideally, Highmount would be an overlay district, and that's how we would protect it. But it's also not an area where I've remotely heard any interest from property owners to have that. So.
Well, I went on a walk in that neighborhood last weekend and identified several properties that had enough integrity to maybe landmark. You can share those if you have it up, Tanya. Those pictures, just quickly go through them if you will.
I put them in the research committee folder if you want to. Okay, can you see this?
Yep.
Okay, I have them in the order that you sent them, so I can flip through. Just let me know when to go to the next one.
I don't have addresses for any of these, but you can just quickly go through them. Just give the committee an idea of what these houses look like. It looks like there's one plan, and it just varies by how it's positioned on the lot. They're attractive little houses for sure. And that's a advertisement I found in the newspaper advertising the neighborhood. So does anybody have any thoughts on this project or landmarking these houses? There is the issue of the discriminatory practices with the FHA and the GI Bill that we would have to deal with. So, anybody have any thoughts?
I do, which is probably no surprise to the committee. I think this is a period of history that's really important to understand and to also comment on the fact that it was inherently racist. I mean, it's the redlining of the whole country. And if we don't do that, then is history likely to repeat itself here? I mean, I think if they can be designated with the understanding, and I think you've said this before, Tanya, that we can put comments in the designation that these homes were built as a way of this country welcoming back the war veterans and the GIs, but also left behind an entire population. And I don't want to lose that connection. So I know it's a sensitive subject, and the committee has probably not addressed it before, but I think we should. I think it's part of everything we're being asked to address now. You know, why is this house protected and this one isn't? This one represents a racist behavior. This one doesn't. You know, I feel like this is a place to take a stand. These houses are really an important part of history. And redlining was the wrong thing in our society. And I think the houses in some ways represent the period of time of these people returning, but also represent the fact that we weren't always an equal country under the same justice for all humans. And I feel like we should make a statement about it.
So with that said, from a professional, you know, standpoint, my thought is we would, before, you know, sort of moving forward to designation, we would want to back up and, you know, have it incorporated in sort of the whole big picture that we're looking at. so that if, you know, the commission does decide to move towards designation, you've got all the sort of the background. There would be, you know, simultaneous, you know, efforts looking at the African American, you know, resources from the same time period, and then, you know, sort of wrapping it all up together. So get some context.
Yeah, I feel like recognizing those discriminatory practices is important, but I don't know if I feel like personally that landmark designation is the way to go about that. So I feel like landmark designation is an honor and generally has a positive connotation. I mean, and so I feel like there could be other venues that we could use to recognize that in particular. And when Nick gave his piece about why he had proposed this, I feel like he had emphasized that the time period was important, the post World War II veterans group was important, and that he wanted to highlight, or that he was interested in the that they were of a different, you know, different area than we might usually designate in the city, and a different, you know, size, more modest, and things of that nature. That's kind of what I gleaned from what he said. So I feel like there may be other properties that we could focus on that have some of those same attributes that don't have that discriminatory piece in it. So those are my feelings on it.
I agree with you, Katie. I see a lot of parallels between this and the Daniels house, in that Daniels did an enormous amount of good in his life, but he also did an enormous amount of harm in his life. And the GI Bill is a lot like that, and that it really did a lot to help this country, an enormous amount to help this country after the war, both of them. But it also almost completely abandoned, you know, the Black population. So it's sort of balancing those, and yeah, I see a lot of similarities. Anybody else?
Well, given that, I agree with you. But how do we is it our role to say that the history here is that this construction, and I'm not talking about landmarking the property, but is it our role to make a statement about the community, and that it served one aspect of Raleigh well and didn't serve the other aspect of Raleigh? Is that our job, is to say that and designate the area as a historic site and say, wow, this, you know, had a reason, people thought it was logical, and they completely mistook the fact that it left behind an entire population? I mean, where does that get, or is that not our job to make that statement? I mean, how do we not, I'm not saying we should honor these people. I completely agree with you, Katie. But how do we make the statement that this kind of action should be understood for what it was? And is that our job to do, or do we recommend that, Tanya, as you were saying, to someone else, or in a research project or something else? I don't know, but I don't think it should be lost. And I feel like if no one's saying that, and the houses get knocked down, it will be lost. And then we'll forever lose that period of history that we should understand, accept, and acknowledge the mistakes that were made, along with the things that seemingly had some benefit to the community. And I'm sure that's why they did it, to benefit the community, to get young GIs back to Raleigh. I mean, that's why we're building the soccer stadium. And I mean, it seems to me history just keeps repeating itself. So if we take a stand on some things, or if it's not our job, then whose job is it? And how do we help them take a stand on it? That's all I got to say.
So I wasn't as familiar with this. I believe I found it on Google Maps, familiar with the area because it's kind of between where I live and downtown. And to Susan's point about, if they knock them down, they are knocking them down in this neighborhood at a very rapid pace. You probably noticed on your walk, like there's sort of the historic homes are dappled in between these kind of like much larger houses. So the character of this particular neighborhood is changing very rapidly. And, the cost of purchasing a home now, is of course, even if it was exclusive, and it was exclusive of a particular group of people, even now, the price to live in this neighborhood is no longer aligned with the original intent, even as far as the accessibility. So there's a lot of like kind of intersecting themes going on in this neighborhood that warrant that question. Is it a matter of telling the story and where does it get told, or by doing something with regard to designation, does that limit what someone can do on the property, right? So you can't knock it down and build one of these like larger homes, and then what does that mean? What are we saying when we take that route with things? Yeah.
Could we, a solution to this might just be, because I agree with you, Susan, that the history should be remembered and told. Could we just include it in our study of Jim Crow properties? It seems like the most logical thing to do to me.
I think you could. We could also, if we move down this path, whoever we hire to do this work, we'll look at the work that's already been done. Because the Highmount, so from a district standpoint, Georgetown in that area was already determined, in 2010, or I think around when that happened, to not have enough integrity to be a district, because we were looking at neighborhoods that were built from 45 to 65. That's when Highmount was designated. That's when, Madonna Acres and Battery Heights and Capitol Heights were designated. So, and I think that's why Nick was looking at landmarking, because he knows there's not a district there. But I don't recall from the reports, actually looking at it from that historic picture standpoint of, focusing on the GI Bill and the housing practices and all of that. So you could certainly, I was a long way to say, yes, you could tie that in. Absolutely. If we put that in the scope, they will look at it for you.
The other question is that enough? I believe these houses do have significance. But I don't know, I guess I'll think about that.
So you have one more meeting. You have your January research committee meeting before the retreat. Okay. So you've got one more opportunity to talk about it and sort of decide what you want to propose. When I did my sort of background research, I didn't look at the context and designations from the 4565. So we can bring that information on what's already been done, okay, to you next month.
Rochelle, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I guess, when you mentioned that you think that they're significant. I know with the Daniels house, we talked about the significance of like the person, and then that's not balanced by the significance of the architecture. So just curious, or I guess as we continue to have the conversation about, how we're weighing that in this situation, is there something architecturally significant about, the scale and the form and the texture? And I almost wonder as I look just kind of like up the street and remember my drives through, is there something about, them singularly, or maybe a group of them just kind of like as a collection or something? Do you capture the series of these 3 adjacent homes that are all modifications of this typology that, you can sort of freeze that in time and go, I'm just curious about that side of things too.
Yeah, I think they're, as I think Aaron said or Colette said, their strength is in numbers, for sure. Anyone else have anything to add?
I'm just going to bring up that yesterday at the city council meeting, Hillcrest Cemetery and the McAdams House were designated Raleigh Historic Landmarks. Ta-da! And also, I'm going to say this every time I see anybody, don't forget January 5th. That evening is the joint public hearing for the name change for Haywood House and Daniels House.
What dates are those again? What date is that?
The joint public hearing is the evening of January 5th. The research committee is that next morning, January 6th. And I will be going in and updating the commission's Google Calendar that theoretically y'all are on and getting invitations for. And then it does look like we'll be meeting virtually through March. You can just go ahead and plan on that. That's what they've said City Council will be doing at this point. So as each month, meeting comes up, you'll get the WebEx invite for that as well.
I have one more quick question. Sorry. So then, when you travel to other cities like Charleston and things like that, there's a number of homes that they have that are available as educational opportunities through tours and things like that. Does that somehow, do we work with anybody on that? Does that sort of structure or infrastructure exist for Raleigh? And I know like it's an interesting space to be in when we start talking about designations and homes and the storytelling aspect of it and the educational aspect of it versus just kind of like preserving it as an object and whether people drive by and know what's going on or not. So I was just curious about how, if we do decide as these instances come up and there's the more specific narrative that we want to emphasize or celebrate or the story to be told, is there a way to kind of like feed it into some sort of system like that? Not to kick people out of their homes, but if there, happens to be a series of vacant ones and, can they get absorbed into some sort of like museum telling experience for the greater population?
So that has not been a program that the commission has done. You have the authority to own properties through the city, but it's the sort of museum side of it has really been left either to those city owned properties and then the historic museums program in Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources, or nonprofits that are out there. You've had one-off tours over the years. You've had, educational events. The mobile app, RaleighHistoric.org, could certainly be used to tie in. So finding, helping nonprofits is really the role you've taken. The challenge is there is not a one Raleigh focused preservation nonprofit entity.
Okay.
And this commission is a 501c3 nonprofit in addition to being, the city board. But it's been a challenge. We've tried to work, to create one, anyway.
I thought, and this is again coming from my past experience, my entire company was called Field Trip Factory, and we did 30,000 field trips a year across the country. So I have a long history in this whole field trip background. So the point I'm going to make is having field trips hosted in sites, I think might be fraught with lots of issues connecting with the right homes, the right population, the right not-for-profit. But I loved what you said, Tanya, about our website. And we could do virtual field trips on our website of every location that we deem as important and educationally valuable to the community. So Vershay, I think it would be a wonderful project for this committee to undertake that kind of educational effort on our website. So it isn't lost. And then at some point, if somebody wants to bring it to life, it's doable. We got organizations like Microsoft, and we got organizations that people hadn't even thought of to support field trips that were educationally valuable. And we hosted them online and on site. So I think we started on site. I love your idea.
Susan, I would encourage you to attend a community awareness meeting. This is an area of expertise I did not know you had, and now we want to divide your attention and suck you and bring you over to community awareness land.
Sure. Invite me and I will attend. I mean, okay. That's literally, I made it from my kitchen to a multi-million-dollar international company. So this is absolutely an area of expertise I have.
Got it.
I would also say that an alternative is to pitch ideas to the museum. I think that they're always looking for interesting exhibit ideas, and using the research that we fund and do. I'm thinking most recently of the Valent report. I think that could lend itself to a really interesting exhibit. And that would be a different way. I mean, it's not as exciting as touring a house or a building, but it would still get out to more people.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely does education in a valuable way.
And I'll touch on, Susan, what you suggested is actually, and Vershay, is the virtual tours at least are directly in line with some of the work that the Community Awareness Committee is attempting to do on a monthly basis. So far, I think Heather has essentially done a Facebook live stream once a month somewhere outside that she can access as a member of the public. But she is digging for new ideas. They're working on a scavenger hunt currently, hopefully set up in February to get people out to different historic buildings around downtown. So if you've got ideas about that interactive component, they are looking for it. And you're off the hook for this month because they met yesterday, but they'll be back eventually. So yeah, we would welcome you over there with any ideas.
I'm glad
and also. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying I'm glad to help. Just let me know. I'll be there. I wasn't aware of it. So thank you.
That'd be great. And Vershay, just to speak to your general house access, house museum ideas, I know in Charleston, I can't think of one that is run by the city specifically. And I think of us as the city in a way due to being the commission component. But they do run the museum. And we've got the city museum. So as Colette pointed out, that's a very easy sort of fluid communication for us to pitch them some ideas and help out. And I know that we do have some city-run house museums as well currently.
Right, Mordecai House.
Hope House. So there's some opportunities currently.
And before, I was just going to add, we do have an activity book that was created in 2011 as part of the 50th anniversary of the commission. I think we still have boxes of them still, but it could certainly use to be. We have 2 boxes left, so maybe what, 50-ish, 100? I don't know.
I think it's 100.
So we've got 100 of those left, but it might be time to do another one of those. We handed those out to everywhere we went, and I know we gave a bunch to some teachers who knew about it. So throwing that out there, since y'all don't know about it, since we're talking on a computer and not looking at a activity book. We didn't call it a coloring book. We didn't call it a children's activity book because some of the activities are really hard.
Were we handing those out at the Moore Square event? Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got coloring and a word search and, jumbles and things like that. It's good. I think we could do it again and even, bump up the quality.
Outside suggestion, put it online, send it to the whole school, the Wake County school districts, and every teacher in the county will use it. They're desperate for that kind of stuff. They're giving teachers free activities like that is invaluable, and it's easy to do.
Yeah, I'll have to look and see if we've still got the electronic versions that created that. That's a good idea.
Let me know, because I have one of the places that did my program was here in North Carolina with the North Carolina Association of Educators. So let me know.
And also, I'm on the Raleigh Historic Cemeteries Advisory Board, and cemeteries are the perfect place for tours, interpretive things like that, and we do lots of work. So, and specifically in this case, we've been talking about African-American historic resources. Many of our cemeteries have an African-American section that we're always very interested in publicizing and exploring and doing more research on. And one of our cemeteries, one of the 4 that we manage, is historically an African-American cemetery, the Mount Hope. So I'm happy to put anyone in touch with people that I work with there if we ever want to do that.
Caleb, we probably will utilize you pretty soon. I know that the Community Awareness Committee has also been focused on Mount Hope. And I think Gaston has approached Jane Thurman in the recent past, and maybe working to follow up on that. But you could certainly grease some wheels in that regard and provide information as well. So what a team we have. And I meant to say, Verche, I think getting NOMA involved in any kind of survey expansion is a great idea. So this is an exciting meeting. So many skills.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a board meeting every couple weeks. So, I'll let them know kind of some of the ideas that came out of this and, sort of bring some of those things back. But I think it could be, a wonderful partnership.
Okay, unless anybody has anything else, I'll call it. Thanks, everybody.